Down goes Brown. Back with us here on the Wednesday edition of the Athletic Hockey Show. We got a question for you right off the top. Help us fill out a Mount Rushmore of goalies. We're talking about this because Marc-Andre Fleury is inching in on Patrick Waugh on the all-time wins list, okay? So if Mount Rushmore, Sean, of goaltenders has, in whatever order you want to put it, Dominic Hasek, Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, who's goalie number 4?
Are we limiting this to the modern era?
I don't think so, right? I think that's the beauty of the Mount Rushmore, right? Is it Gordie Howe's and Bobby Orr's can maybe work their way into it? So
because it's tough. I mean, that's the clear big 3 of the modern era, and there's kind of a big 3 of the original 6 era, I guess. Although the extended past that, which would be Sawchuk, Plante, and Glenn Hall. I don't know which one of those guys you pick. Probably Sawchuk, I would go as number 4. I think you could make the case that, a Jacques Plante maybe bumps Martin Brodeur or somebody like that. I know that, Devils fans, okay, you're the goalie guy.
No. I love Plante, and I love the idea of like a Sawchuk, Plante, Glenn Hall, Ken Dryden. I don't know if like of that as like as an old school, like old era monument. I don't think any of those 4 touch the top 3 though. I don't know. Again, I grew up watching these guys. I obviously didn't grow up watching any of these other guys. So it's really tough to compare. And like I said with Ian earlier, they're playing different sports almost because and it's changed so much.
The cross era question is always so tricky. Let's be real honest. Like I said Sawchuk, but let's look at Jacques Plante. I mean, you go to his hockey reference page, look at all the Vezinas, the Hart votes, the first team All-Stars. This guy was dominant, absolutely dominant, phenomenal. Had a major impact on history with the mask, obviously. Just a legend, an absolute legend. You throw that guy in the time machine and you put him on the ice tonight, he gets lit up by modern NHL. They're just, I mean, you're right. You're
putting him on San Jose. That's not fair.
Maybe he doesn't get lit up by San Jose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's always a debate we're going to have. I kind of like, I mean, you could make the case that Dryden should be the 4th guy in the modern era. All through the 70s. Again, it's different. The guy that I would, if we're making it more modern than that, then my 4th guy that, we saw and appreciated in our lifetime, at least Ian and I, in his prime, would be Ed Belfour. I think he would be my number 4, ahead of Fleury, ahead of Lundqvist, ahead of Luongo is another one that I'd really think of. But Belfour's got a couple of Vezinas, got the Stanley Cup. At his height, was a guy that you just you knew. Oh man, who are the Hawks starting Belfour tonight? Oh boy, we're gonna have a real rough one. So yeah, my modern guys, that's it. But boy, it's tough. Where do you make that cutoff? And then, boy, who do you put on it for the different eras? Let me just throw one more name that doesn't get enough respect. And I'll tell you right now, I'm gonna say the name, and some of the younger or newer fans aren't even gonna know who I'm talking about. Bill Durnan. Look up Bill Durnan. I believe played only 7 seasons and I think won 6 Vezinas. I might be one off on that. The guy just showed up, dominated, was the best goalie easily year in, year out, and then left in his late 20s because of health issues. Doesn't get enough respect as an all-time legend goalie.
He's kind of the opposite of like Fleury and Luongo, right? Who just played forever.
If you're the
and
sort
just
of person who
racked
knocks
up the wins,
Fleury,
just kept on racking them up.
He's a compiler, he was never the best. He just stuck around forever. You should be pumping the Bill Durnan tires because that guy, he and Ken Dryden are the 2 that it was just in and out quick and dominant the entire way.
It's funny when you bring up Belfour, like when Ed Belfour first started in the NHL in Chicago, like he was a 40-win guy right away, right in the conversation as best goalie, and he continued it throughout his career. I loved your column today about guys who maybe had a similar start to their career as Ed Belfour, and it looked like after like season 3, 4, 5, like this guy, go ahead, start making the bust. This guy's going to the Hall of Fame, and it just sort of fell off of a cliff and you had a couple of goalies in there like Ron Hextall, Danny Heatley was in there, Gary Suter, I think, was in there. Out of all of the names that you compiled, is there one guy still on there that you're like, you know what, I could actually make a case that this guy is a borderline Hall of Famer, or did the second half of their career just fell off a cliff? There's no argument to be had on any of those guys that you wrote about today.
I did mention Gary Suter. He is a guy that I think the case is maybe stronger than people would think. He is, to start with, he is we always hear, you used to hear it for Pierre Turgeon, highest scoring player that's not in the Hall of Fame. You hear it for Keith Tkachuk. He's got the most goals of anyone not in the Hall of Fame. Gary Suter's the highest scoring defenseman not in the Hall of Fame of eligible guys, and it's not even close. And he's one of those guys where, you look at the resume for the Norris trophies and that, and you don't really see it. But this guy was playing in the Ray Bourque, Chris Chelios, Paul Coffey era. Maybe we shouldn't expect him to be racking them up. And plus, also as an American, a guy that was a big part of that program developing and becoming the powerhouse that it eventually became. You're not going to get a lot of support in Canada. As soon as you say Gary Suter, people are thinking Wayne Gretzky and they're thinking Paul Kariya, and they're not happy about either of them. But he's a guy with an option. As I wrote in the column, Rick Barton was a guy that I from the French Connection line. Was a guy that I didn't fully appreciate, didn't really see him by the time I became a hockey fan. His best years were behind him. But he's a guy that I look at. I was surprised at how strong his case is. A guy that, to put it in a more modern context, think about Paul Kariya, think about Cam Neely, guys like that, where they were great and they were well on that Hall of Fame track, and then they get hurt. Martin's that sort of guy where you look at it and you go, man, if he hadn't messed up his knee and then it wasn't treated right and everything, and his career just pretty much ended almost, out of nowhere, he'd be a guy that would be up there. And then the other guy that I guess I don't think is going to get in, and I don't think I could really make a case, but of all the guys that I mentioned, and maybe of all the guys who aren't in the Hall of Fame period, there's two ways that you can talk about this. You can look at the stats and the resumes and all of this stuff and make all the comparisons, or you can just go by that Hall of Fame eye test of who was it that at some point you were watching them and you were going, that guy's going to be a Hall of Famer for sure. And that you're at the game and you're telling your friends or your kids or your dad or whoever you're with, watch that player because that's a Hall of Famer. And the guy for me, and you mentioned him, Ron Hextall. If you had told me 3 years into his career that Ron Hextall wasn't going to be in this guy was the coolest hockey player that we had ever seen. I mean, this guy is, first of all, he comes in as a goalie. Vezina, Calder, Conn Smythe, first year, he's in the running for everything, drags a Philadelphia team to the Stanley Cup final twice in 3 years, but he's doing, his goaltending was Vezina quality, and yet it was the third most interesting thing about him because he was attacking guys left and right, and when he got bored of doing that, he was scoring goals, which it blew our minds back then.
Yeah.
Like, goalie goals are rare today, but we'd never even conceived that a goalie could do that. He does it twice. As I said in the piece, he was a goalie on an American team doing national ad campaigns in Canada because he was that cool. And I mean, the Hall of Fame being, a lot of people put the underline on fame. Man, I don't know that there was a player that was more fascinating to watch for the first few years of his career. And he didn't fall off a cliff afterwards. He was pretty good for, he had his good and his bad years. But some injuries in the trade to the Nordiques in the Lindros deal kind of spelled the end of him as an elite guy. But that would be, out of everyone, the one guy that I would look back on and go, you're kidding me. This guy doesn't make the Hall of Fame. I mean, just based on how much fun he is to watch in his first few years, he should be halfway there already.
What's interesting is in Sean's piece, he has a link to that Canada Dry ginger ale commercial from the 80s. Mm-hmm. And there's two things that the thing that jumps out at me is, nowadays when you see a lot of athletes in ads, like I always think of remember when Shaq, what was Shaq doing? Like icy hot patches. It's always like a generic jersey that it'll be the colors of the team, but it's not. Ron Hextall is straight up wearing a Flyers jersey in this Canada Dry commercial. And I'm wondering, when's the last time we've seen an athlete like usually like it's all generic
Mhm.
stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like
Ron
Edmonton
Hextall's
hockey
wearing a
player
Flyers
Connor
jersey.
McDavid. Yeah. And you know what? I don't know any of the background on that. How much would you be willing to bet that that's just because he showed up, they had a Flyers jersey, and nobody thought to check,
Yeah,
nobody was going to complain, no lawyers involved. It was just, yeah, here you go, man. And you and your mustache are going to drink Canada Dry in a way too seductive way. And, for the camera. And then that was it, man. You don't have to be sweet to be good. Great tagline. That's an all timer,
yeah.
right? I'd love to know what came first, the tagline or we got Ron Hextall to do our ad.
They must have built the ad campaign around Ron Hextall, right?
You would think so, but I don't know. Canada Dry, you can picture them saying, you don't have to be sweet to be good. Oh, I like that. Okay, well, who could we get? And just the first guy to go, Ron Hextall. They're all sitting at the bar going, there's got to be somebody. And then in the background, you see Ron Hextall just chasing Rob Brown around with his stick. And somebody goes, I think we got our guy.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous I wasn't old enough to enjoy this era, this Ron Hextall breakout era. Like just listening to you talk about it, I am genuinely upset that I did not
I'm trying to
experience
even
that.
think of like an like I it would be outrageous to even make the comparison, but like what we're seeing in baseball with Otani, where he's like pitching and hitting at the same time, you're just like, how is that even the idea that you had a goaltender who could score goals and was also your team's goon was absolutely nuts. I mean,
And he was in Philadelphia. Like it just
Yeah.
fit, right? Like
perfect.
it just
Exactly.
fit. You know what I remember too about him, Sean? And again, those like mid to late 80s Stanley Cups are like those are the ones like I don't really remember much about. Like I don't remember the Islanders dynasty, really. I do remember the Oilers, and I remember the Oilers Flyers Cup. And do you remember this about Ron Hextall? That he used to take his stick and he would like wrap both
Yep.
sides of the goalposts. Like it was this kind of very intricate, Jesse. It was like this intricate routine. Let's say they were about to do a face-off, and he would take his stick and he would like wrap it against the post like this, and then get ready. And
You know
he
who
just
else
stop
did that?
doing that?
You know who else did that? Every kid who got stuck
Yep.
playing goal in road hockey,
Yes.
man. You couldn't start the game because we all had to do it. And it's just, again, it was classic Hextall because every other goalie, what do? Right? They talk to their posts. They thank their post. This guy's like just physically assaulting them, just beating the crate. You better be there for me tonight. It was fantastic. Was also the first goalie to put bring the water bottle out, put it on top of the net. That was another innovation, and turned into a whole issue in the Stanley Cup final because Glenn Sather complained about it. Glenn Sather, the Oilers, had the famous. He was like, "What are we going to bring a roasted chicken out for them to snack on next? Like, get them out of there." So it was a whole big controversy. So yeah, good old Ron Hextall, man. I'm saying this is the most pro Ron Hextall podcast that's been recorded in the last few years, right? And there's Penguins and Flyers fans now who only know him as like a front office guy, and they're like, "Come on, it's you've been beaten up long enough, Ron. It's about time you got some positive coverage."
Yeah, we could bring in Josh Yohe and Rob Rossi here to round
just
out
tell
the
him,
round
just
table.
be like, "Hey, yeah, Sean just talked for 20 minutes about how great a job Ron Hextall did. What do you think?"
Counterpoint. You and I, Sean, we were part of a little roundtable that we dropped on the Athletic Wednesday. You, me, Daniel Nugent-Bowman, who covers the Oilers, Julian McKenzie, who covers the Flames, and I jokingly, I think in our Slack channel, referred to it as like the the panel of the eternal damned.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
something like that. Because Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, and Calgary are all off to suboptimal starts. And in the case of Edmonton, it feels like it's a full-fledged panic. In the case of Ottawa, it feels like it's getting close. Malaise might be the best word to use to describe Toronto and Calgary, where it's just sort of I'm numb to it all. But as we were putting that together, the task was state the reason why Team X and their fan base should be the angriest.
Yep.
Coming away from that, who does have the right now to be the angriest in Canada?
And like I said, it's I think it's tough for me to make the case that it's the Leafs, and it has not been great in Toronto for sure. They've the record's okay, 6-4-2, but they've had 3 big comeback wins. They've had the shootout win over the Habs, that sort of thing, where it's like they're not clicking at all. And the ways that they're losing or the ways that they're not playing well are all the same ways that we're all worried about heading in the season. So it's kind of like, oh, here we go again if you're a Leafs fan. That said, I don't know that we can touch what was happening in Calgary, at least until they won the last couple of games, and what's happening right now in Ottawa. If the Senators win tonight in Toronto, probably flips that script, and now we're back to panic time more for the Maple Leafs. But I gotta say, like, really, I think we all have to kind of bow our heads in the direction of the Edmonton Oilers right now, because I can't. I mean, they're the worst team of the four, had the highest expectations, I would argue, of the four, and it really does feel like, not that it's already too late for them, because again, they have to play at like 105-point pace to get back. That's doable for that team. But you look at the contract situations coming up and the extensions and everything, and the Jack Campbell scenario, and now it's, is it going to be the coach? Is it going to be this or that? They feel like they're maybe 2 or 3 games away, and maybe it's not even that, because they got San Jose tomorrow, and oh boy, I mean, you can't even imagine it. But if they lose to San Jose, oh boy, they might clinch it as far as the worst of the four. They might have us all beat permanently at that point, because I can't imagine there's anything lower as a rock bottom than that.
Man, hey, Jesse, I'm curious too about the Jack Campbell stuff. As Sean mentioned, you don't often see a goalie with that much term left on his deal, and a team just basically washing their hands of it. Ottawa did that. Ottawa did that with Matt Murray, so it's not like it isn't unprecedented, but it is the nuclear option, right? Like, we can agree this is detonating the relationship in all likelihood. Do you ever see a path to Jack Campbell getting it back, or do you just think this position is so predicated on confidence that this young man, I just don't think he has it. It feels like he's a broken goaltender. Does he ever get it back?
It's going to be tough. I mean, I agree with you. It feels like he's a broken goalie. And to me, he's in a situation. I was just having this conversation the other day. I just feel like there is not a harder job in the NHL than the goalie of the Edmonton Oilers, for multiple reasons. I think you have a loose team in front of you. It's a good team. Even when they're playing well, they're still a loose team that gives up big chances. And the expectation is so high. So you've got really high expectations. You've got a team that doesn't do you any favors in front of you. And then when you don't play well, the pressure and the outside scrutiny is higher than pretty much anywhere. I just think that combination is why this team can't find a goalie that plays well. I mean, even Skinner, I was very high on Skinner after last year, and then he comes into this season and he's really struggling. And I'm just starting to think it's not the goalies. For a while there, you could say they haven't brought the talent in, but Campbell was doing fine in Toronto. It looked like it was such a great story, right? Like, he had finally found it. He had turned things around, and he's a talented goalie. I don't think the goalies are the problem in Edmonton. And because of that, and because Jack Campbell is signed to such a long-term deal, and now he's in their AHL affiliate, Bakersfield, I don't see an easy route to him getting back on his feet and being a $5 million goalie that they want him to be. And now if you're Edmonton, he's counting $3.5 million towards the cap to play in Bakersfield. And you bring up Calvin Pickard, who is not the solution. He hasn't had a save percentage above 900 since, I think, 2017. So it's been a while. It's on Stuart Skinner to pull himself up and be as good as he was last year. And I think it's tough playing behind a team that's not playing that well with all the scrutiny they've had. That is such a tough situation. I do not envy anyone playing goalie for the Edmonton Oilers. It is like, it's not Mackenzie Blackwood in San Jose, where it's just a firing squad every night, but Mackenzie Blackwood can let in some goals and it's not the end of the world. Like, the expectation isn't there for him to be perfect every night. It's such a tough situation for Campbell. And in terms of, I wasn't part of the panel for angriest. I think that it's interesting. Like, Edmonton, the expectations were so high. I feel like that's the easy answer. They should be the angriest. They were the Stanley Cup favorites, and now they're like Sean said, they're the worst of the teams. But to me, like, if you're an Edmonton fan, at least there's hope, right? The talent's there. You've got two of the best players on the planet. Like, they were just in the conference final. There's still some hope that they can turn this around and have a fantastic season. I think if you look at Calgary and Ottawa, the hope is obviously a lot less that they can do that. And it's almost none now. And every game that goes by, the hope gets less and less. I feel like I would be angrier in that situation. If you told me you can be a fan of one of these two teams, I'd be more angry in the hopeless situation that we keep saying this is going to be Ottawa's year where they're good and they just aren't. And I would rather be an Oilers fan that has at least the hope that we've got two superstars that can turn this thing around.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sean. Before we let you go, I think you actually have a unique perspective on Jack Campbell too, because he was Toronto's goalie before he goes to Edmonton. Like, did you when they signed the 5x5? Like, did you think that was just a massive overpay, or did you think you know what, maybe this will work out? Like you go back to the end of Jack Campbell's era in Toronto. Did you ever think it was going to end this way for him in Edmonton?
No, it's first of all, by all accounts, he's a great guy. So it stinks to watch this play out. I mean, it's hard not to root for him. It was a strange situation because he had some very decent stretches in Toronto, and that last year he was great for half the season, and then not very great for half the season. And it didn't seem like they made any effort at all to lock him in, which seems strange. I will tell you, when the Oilers signed him to that 5-year, $5 million deal, it wasn't the $5 million that worried me. It was the 5 year. It was that commitment, that long-term commitment, because, I was sitting there going, it may change of scenery, go somewhere to, play with. It's Connor McDavid's team. They're going to be a cup contender for years. They're going to be all good. He'll be fine, but man, if it doesn't work out, they're really locked in, and they are, and it's tough. Let me just throw this at you before I ditch on you. Jack Campbell plus something of decent value for John Gibson. Who says no?
Who says
Gibson's
no?
got the bigger contract. They're both the same length. Campbell, you can bury in the minors. Obviously, Gibson's a better goalie right now, having a good season. If I'm Edmonton, I'm Ken Holland, I'm desperate for my job. I'm interested. If I'm Anaheim, I may be saying this is my one chance to get out from under a deal that's maybe even worse. Forget who says no. Is anyone slamming the phone down on that?
But if you're Anaheim, Jesse and I were talking about this like just before we came on the air. Anaheim's having like a real fun, and I'm not saying they're a playoff team. I don't want to, but if you trade John Gibson in the next 2 weeks, you're basically putting up the white flag on the season, aren't you? For Jack Campbell? And I don't know that
although the backup, who I barely have even heard of, is playing just as well as John Gibson. I mean, this is that tough thing, right? Like you look at last year, right? It was, we could never, the Sharks can never get out from this Erik Karlsson contract. And then he had a great year and you're like, oh, maybe we can. And then they didn't get all that much for him. Sometimes you got to jump at the opportunity to get out from these deals when you can. Although you getting Jack Campbell back, it's as bad a deal or worse. But I'm just, you know me, I'm a helper. I'm trying to put stuff out there. I don't want to just sit here and criticize Ken Holland. I'm going to offer some suggestions as well. Make the call is all I'm saying.
I don't think I think the Campbell contract is infinitely worse than the John Gibson contract. I don't think the John Gibson contract's that bad. And I think I'm in the minority there.
6.5 for a guy who has not been a net positive goalie in 4 or 5 years until the last couple of weeks.
That's me ignoring the stats because he plays behind an embarrassment of a defense, and they've been better this year. They've been better, and they're not a defensive stalwart. Look at their numbers. They aren't the Kings or the Knights shutting everyone down, but they've just been an actual hockey team. They've been a functioning hockey team with players that know where they're supposed to go. And suddenly John Gibson's good again. It's like, oh my God, it's almost like he was good the whole time. And he just can't stop everything behind this sieve of a defense. My opinion of Gibson is higher than most. And I think that contract's just fine. And I agree with Ian. Like if the Ducks want to win and they've played well enough through the first month to at least give their GM the option of thinking that's possible to make the playoffs. And you mentioned Lucas Dostal. He's been awesome. He was one of my goalie breakout candidates this year. I actually nailed one. So I'm glad I didn't whiff on all of them. He's been very good. And I think he could be a starter down the road. But right now, if you're the Ducks, if you want to make the playoffs, you got to keep John Gibson. Trading for Campbell would just, like Ian said, you're throwing that away.
All right. Well, I like that at the very least, we got the Ducks a new marketing slogan. The Anaheim Ducks, a functional hockey team.
Yes.
Functional hockey team. What a catch. Yeah, love it. All right, Sean, thanks for dropping by. We look forward to hitting up or catching up with you again next week.
Right on. Thanks, guys.